Holland Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this podcast about recruitment practices to support cultural diversity. My name is Alison Choi Flanagan. I'm a partner in the corporate and commercial team at Holland Wilcox, and I'm one of the partner co-leads of our cultural diversity team. We're very lucky to be joined today by three panellists. Alison Daly-Thompson, who's the Talent Acquisition Manager at Holland Wilcox, and she will talk a bit about our talent acquisition processes, particularly in relation to cultural diversity. I'd like to introduce Michael Tangonen. He is an award-winning in-house lawyer and is a Lawyers Weekly 30, Under 30 and FS Sustainability ESG Power 50 winner. For his day job, he is a legal counsel in the superannuation and investment legal team at AMP and is a trusted advisor for AMP's superannuation business. He's also a casual academic at the Faculty of Law and Justice at the University of New South Wales, teaching corporate governance. A cultural diversity advocate, Michael recently served as the chair of AMP's Inclusion and Diversity Council, and outside of his day job, he is the vice president of the New South Wales branch of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, leading the Data and Policies Subcommittee. Holland Wilcox is a proud sponsor of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. Joining us also is Maxine Evers. She is an associate professor in the Faculty of Law, and she is the director of professional programs. Maxine recently co-led a project to better understand the experiences of culturally and linguistically diverse students in the UTS Faculty of Law. Working with Professors Beth Goldblatt and Karen O'Connell, the study sought to address the underrepresentation of COLD lawyers in higher education and in the broad legal profession. So let's talk about some of the more broader topics. Why do you think cultural diversity is a good thing? Let's start with Alison.
Yeah, thanks, Alison, and thank you for having me on this podcast. I think for me, it comes back to, at Holland Wilcox specifically, our purpose. So our purpose at Holland Wilcox is to enable our clients, our people and our communities to thrive. And I think it goes without saying that the communities that we live and we work in are very culturally diverse. And so in order to reflect that, that needs to be reflected as well in our people. Our clients are also very diverse. I think diversity of background and of thinking is really important. Obviously, we're in a profession as lawyers where we need to come up with innovative legal solutions. And the fact is that the more culturally diverse our workforce is, the more that we're able to have those different ways of thinking and to challenge each other's thinking. So I think it just makes sense that our workforce is representative of what's going on out in the community, and it brings a whole range of benefits to a law firm.
Thanks. And from my point of view, we can see that there's a lot of culturally diverse law graduates, and it's really good for us to get the best of the talent pool, really. Yeah. And going forward, a lot of the Australian business community and legal fraternity will have a high proportion of culturally diverse lawyers. If we aren't culturally diverse, we'll actually be considered out of touch, or we will be out of touch. And absolutely, personally, I love all different types of food. I love all different types of celebrations. Wherein, as part of the cultural diversity practice at Holland Wilcox, we will have morning teas for Chinese New Year, have really good food. So that's all that sort of fun and understanding, like, for example, when there's religious holidays, teams from our culturally diverse team people, they'll post on our social media what that actual day means for them and their family, and it just makes it really interesting. Maxine, do you want to talk about why you think cultural diversity is a good thing from a university point of view?
Thank you, Alison, and thank you also for having me on this podcast to talk about the findings of our UTS Law Faculty Survey into culturally and linguistically diverse students' experiences and perceptions of the legal profession. I completely agree with Alison as to the reasons why cultural diversity is critical. And I'll highlight three main areas. As we've already noted, diversity must be representative of the general population. About 1/3 of our students in the law faculty at UTS speak another language other than English at home or were born overseas. So we need to make sure that all students, including those students, have equal access to the workplace. And we know that diversity, and we see this in our faculty at UTS, adds a richness to the workplace, exactly as those examples that you've just given.
Michael, do you have any comments about why you think cultural diversity is a good thing, particularly in recruitment? Yeah.
Thank you for having me as well on the podcast, Alison. And I agree with what you've already said, Alison and Maxine. Now, just by background, the Asian Australian Lawyers Association is the national peak body for Asian Australian lawyers and lawyers with an interest in Asia. We have a branch in each of Australia's state and territory with about 1,200 or so members across Australia. Now, in 2022, we ran a cultural diversity pilot study in which we asked mid to senior lawyers in terms of what they saw as barriers or perceived as barriers in relation to further career progression in the profession, and whether this was attributable to cultural diversity or associated issues. Now, one particular component of that study comes to the front of my mind, and it was this one focus group participant which I'd interviewed. She was a single mother from a minority background, and the way she described the interaction of cultural diversity and its importance was in having the communities around which could assist you and you could serve. So for her, it wasn't just about her working life, but also her family life, in the sense that by having a diverse community which can be reflected in the workplace and outside of the workplace, it not only gave her increased opportunities to engage with people who could talk with her. A third of solicitors in New South Wales are born overseas, and of that third, nearly half have attributed being born overseas to Asia. That diversity is quite important in making sure that this all works.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions for Alison. So how does Holland Wilcox assess graduate applications?
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, at Hall & Wilcox, we take a holistic approach to our early careers recruitment. So that includes the clerkship and the graduate application process. So what that looks like is we take into consideration a range of factors rather than just having a very strict scorecard, which some other firms may have. So we look at things like whether a candidate has a genuine interest in Hall & Wilcox and in commercial law, their legal and their non-legal work experience, any community volunteering or leadership roles, and their academics from their law degree as well. So we don't have any WAM or GPA cutoffs when we look at academics. Obviously, academics are important. However, if someone had poorer grades, we like to understand the context and the reasoning around that when we're going through the process. So we're really keen to ensure that throughout the recruitment process, we are inclusive and fair. And this inclusivity obviously includes cultural inclusion. So we encourage applications from candidates from all cultural backgrounds, all ages, abilities, sexual orientation, and gender identities. Another thing that's really important to us in the process is avoiding unconscious bias as much as possible. And so one way that we do that at present is what we call blind recruitment, which is where we remove identifiable information from a candidate's application. So things like their name, their gender, their address. And we remove that in the initial screening phase of the process. We're really trying to ensure that we're making decisions based on the merits of someone's application and of what they offer in their answers to our questions and through their CV. Yeah, the ultimate, I guess, for us is making sure that we reflect a real culture of inclusivity, and that is reflected in the recruitment process at all stages.
And what can you say about diversity at Hall & Wilcox?
Thank you. Yeah, so following on from that, I think at Hall & Wilcox, our approach to diversity is definitely to focus on inclusion. We want to create an environment where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to participate fully. So, yeah, we want our firm to be a place for everybody. Our key strategic inclusion areas at the moment at Hall & Wilcox include gender equality or gender equity, LGBTIQA plus allyship, cultural inclusion, accessibility, First Nations, caring, and wellbeing inclusion. So we have some diverse interest groups within the firm, and each of them have an employee-led committee that is dedicated to supporting our people to participate and to share their lived experience and to create connection, support, and learning for all our people. Our focus on cultural inclusion really allows us to leverage this diversity and to ensure that we have culturally diverse representation across all of our firm, including, really importantly, in our partnership and our leadership. We're a gold sponsor of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, and we're always looking at other ways to leverage from the international expertise of our colleagues. And one thing that we do particularly that I thought would be good to highlight in the early career space is our First Nations Pathway program. So we provide Australian First Nations university law students with the opportunity to gain really valuable experience and insight into life at Hall & Wilcox. And that's an internship program that we run every year to attract First Nations law clerks. So that's like a little bit of an overview of diversity at Hall & Wilcox. And I'm sure we'll dive a bit deeper later into some other things that we're doing in terms of mentoring and those other programs.
Michael, do you want to talk about some of the things you've been doing with the Asian Australian Lawyers Association?
Sure thing. Thank you, Alison, for that opportunity. And so in 2022, we ran a focus groups and survey across the solicitor arm of the profession. And what we noticed at that time was there was a lack of disclosure and or measurability of what cultural diversity was in the profession at the time. Now, the New South Wales Law Society did start reporting on cultural diversity through whether a person was born in Australia or not since 2021. And we do have that information up to until last year. There is also a national profile of solicitors, which the Law Society of New South Wales also facilitates. However, there isn't that information in relation to country of birth, nationality, or cultural diversity. The gap in diversity is staggering when we look at other jurisdictions who have been reporting since, for example, in the UK, they have been reporting since the 1980s in relation to minorities in their legal profession. And similar reporting has also been done in the United States. And so one of the outcomes from our 2022 pilot study was that at some point a national survey should be done in a similar way to Law Council in 2013, when they ran the National Attrition and Re-engagement Survey in relation to gender, but recasting it in terms of cultural diversity, given we are a service profession, we want our profession to reflect the communities that we serve. And it's not just a matter of representation in the diversity sense, but it's also making sure that communities, especially minority communities, are able to access lawyers, that speak their language, understand their concerns, and ensure that there aren't people that fall through the cracks.
Maxine, do you want to talk about some of the findings of your recent study on cultural and linguistic diversity and perceptions of legal careers, and the discussion around the barriers and opportunities identified for culturally diverse law students?
Thank you, Alison. By way of background, we undertook this survey of our law students from an invitation from Michael and his colleagues at the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. So we also wanted to get their experiences of what it was like coming from a culturally diverse background and in a workplace. We received 170 responses from our detailed survey. It had some closed questions, open-ended questions. That is about 5% of our law student population at UTS. And we were happy with that result because we think it is a good representation of our students. From the survey, we've made several recommendations based on the themes from students' responses. Students had both positive and negative experiences in law school, in their current roles, whether they be in the workforce, whether they be legal or non-legal. And they were able to draw on some really thought through examples of challenges as well as opportunities. In relation to recommendations that relate to our faculty, students gave us feedback in the survey that they felt welcomed by their teachers, they felt included in the classroom. They did, though, note that they didn't see representation of their cultural background across the teaching cohort. As a result of that finding, we have unconscious bias training for our selection committees for staff in the law faculty.
Let's see how we can do better. So how can we challenge bias, direct or unconscious bias? How can we make things better for the next generation? For me, I think one way is just to call it out and educate people, because people don't realise quite often that they have unconscious bias, but really everybody's got unconscious bias in terms of certain things. And so it's about really self-education and being self-aware and just taking that step back. If I'm going into a room, I don't automatically walk towards someone that looks like me. And if I'm in a room, particularly a Hall and Wilcox event, and when we've got clerkships or graduates coming in, if I've got someone who's standing on their own, I actually make a point, if I'm a host, to go and talk to the person that's standing on their own, so to make them feel welcome. And that's a very simple way to, in my mind, I'm going, you know what? I'm going to challenge that myself. I'm going to make sure that I do better. Do any of you have any ideas on how we can challenge unconscious bias?
Yeah, I would just start by, a sort of a curiosity approach, being really curious about your own biases. And as you said, Alison, I think in recruitment, all of us have some unconscious bias to a certain extent, and it's about learning, being curious and educating ourselves about what that looks like and how we can work better to avoid that. So I think, training and education and not being afraid to ask questions. And none of us are perfect. We all have this. That's why it's called unconscious, right? Because we don't often know that we're doing it. And sometimes it takes someone independent or outside of ourselves to really call out when you might be doing something that is leaning towards your unconscious bias. At Hall and Wilcox, I think we really try and give our interviewers training around unconscious bias and how it presents itself, and get our partners and hiring managers to really think about what that looks like and how they can challenge that.
Maxine?
Thank you, Alison. I'd just like to go back to your point about your conscious reaching out to new lawyers or potential lawyers that are on their own. One of the strong findings of our survey was that many students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds had feelings of isolation and being marginalised in the workplace. And they gave several examples that had the common thread of being left out of conversations, not being invited to social events, not being given the most interesting work because the supervisor felt that English wasn't going to be good enough to communicate with clients, etc. So I think that's really important, that we are very aware of the students that might be very much on their own. I think the other important part is around education and advocacy from our perspective for all students, both called students and non-called students, to be aware of obligations in workplaces around diversity, around policy and programs, to know about what's on offer to support diversity in the workplace, and really to think about the careers that they're going into in the workplaces, to ask questions around what they do. As you've said, at Hall and Wilcox, celebrating different religious days, celebrating different cultural occasions, understanding that people may need to take time off for obligations in relation to culture and religion, seeing themselves in the partners in the firm, exposing students to those factors to look out for, I think, is also important. And I stress it's not just culturally and linguistically diverse students that should be expected to advocate for themselves, but it should be all students. And one of the interesting findings from our survey was that, I suppose not surprisingly, culturally and linguistically diverse students were much more aware of what was being offered in their workplace or the gaps in their workplace than non-called students.
Michael, how do
I
you think we
agree.
can challenge bias?
I agree with you there, Maxine, that the role of being the challenger shouldn't always be on the person who comes from a cold background. And in our study, that's also what we have found, because sometimes coming from a cold background creates that burden, in that for certain backgrounds, the role of the challenge is not there. So it's not uncommon to come, for example, from an Asian background, from a Chinese background, in which growing up as a child, you were spoken to, but you don't necessarily have the ability to challenge, say, the parental authority or to ask questions. And in that type of situation, there is a role for colleagues and for professionals to have that empathy and sympathy towards their colleagues, and to, if they see that gap, to reach out and to try and understand where others are coming from and what are their own also unconscious biases.
Going finally to our final topic, what do we think is best practice? I think culture comes from the top down and the bottom up. So I think it's really important for all law firms and organisations that diversity is led by the board down. So it's really important for us. For example, the board talks about diversity, whether it's culture or gender or other, and the communication comes from senior partners or the board in relation to that. And I also think it's really important in terms of best practice that you have diversity in the people that are reviewing the applications, so that has, and who are involved in the recruitment process. When we have morning teas for clerks, that we have a diverse range of partners that turn up, so that the applicants can see what they could be, because if you don't see what you can't be, you sometimes feel that you can't get there. So I think that's really important. And I think the blind recruitment we do is a really good best practice. I think, as Michael said, we have an obligation to our community to do better generally. And I like what Maxine says. Quite often I'll go to women's business lunches, but it's really good to see men there as well, because they are the people that support diversity. So I think that in terms of diversity, we not only have people from culturally diverse backgrounds involved in that and pushing that forward, but also people from non-culturally diverse backgrounds involved in that as well. Does anyone have, Alison, do you want to talk about what you think is best practice, how we can do better?
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I agree with all of that. I think, training and education is a big part of it. I think I agree with you that we need to really think about the partners when we have an interview and we have a panel of interviewers, looking at the diversity amongst those interviewers. It's really important. And so I know that's something that we're constantly evaluating and thinking about during the recruitment process, same as at events, making sure that panels have proper representation across them. I think as well, something else I could mention that we do at Hall and Wilcox is we've got a program called Mentor Connect. And so we have a lot of sort of buddy programs and mentoring. And as part of that, trying to encourage people from culturally diverse backgrounds to participate in that. And if they want to be matched with a mentor from a similar background to them, or if they have certain requests in terms of what they want to get from their mentor, that we accommodate that and we listen to that. So that's something that we're working on as well. I think in the recruitment space in particular, we're doing a lot of work exploring partnerships with external organisations that can help us reach culturally diverse candidates and attract more culturally diverse candidates. For example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander candidates, we're exploring partnerships with a couple of external organisations that will increase our representation in that area. So that's something that we can always do better as a law firm, and we're always open to ideas and partnerships around that.
Michael?
I agree with you, Alison. Now, mentoring is important. I also think along with mentoring, there is that idea of being an ally or being a sponsor. And it runs both ways. It's not just culturally diverse people being allies to culturally diverse people, but it's also non-culturally diverse people being allies to culturally diverse people.
In relation to best practice, it's reassuring to know that top tier firms are looking closely at diversity inclusion within their workplace, from partners down to new grads. Our survey showed that the majority of students want to work in a top tier firm. The results of the survey in terms of the students who are working in a legal workplace, 3% of called students were working in a top tier law firm. So that would be as paralegals, administrative assistants, etc., compared to 22% of non-called students working in top tier law firms. So that's quite a significant gap before we've even really got into that recruitment process as a graduate solicitor. So for me, it's got to be a multi-dimensional or a multi-stakeholder approach. It's got to be faculties, universities, law firms, other legal workplaces, and the professional associations. For us, the Law Society of New South Wales and the Bar Association.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation. And please, if you're interested, join us for our other podcasts in this series, or more generally for Hall and Wilcox. I'd like to thank particularly Maxine, Alison and Michael for participating in this conversation.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.